Hi, it's week 7. The presentation today is going to be shorter than some of the other ones, and you need to definitely spend time reading the book and other assigned materials for this week, because there's less that I'm going to cover from those materials. And so this is truly a supplement and not a replacement this week. And so what I want to first talk about today is we're going to talk about social media issues and OSHA. And so here is the social media issues. And social media has become a big thing over the last 15 or so years, and everyone is really spending a lot of time on social media. And so there's a couple of things that companies need to pay attention to, and some of this is in these slides or not, and some of it is not. But with respect to employees, you may want to have policies and procedure in your handbook about when they can, if they can, engage in social media while they're in the workplace. And a lot of companies would say you cannot do that while you're in the workplace and on our time, because that's not what they're being paid to do, unless that is specifically their job as a social media person for the company. And so you can limit their social media activities while they're at work, and we have to be careful of monitoring their social activities outside of work and what we can and can't do with those. Another thing that this comes up with respect to current employees, as I was just referring, as well as applicants. A lot of companies are using social media to try to investigate and look for background information on employees before they hire them. Searching social media in that regard can be dangerous, because dangerous, not like physically dangerous, but dangerous with respect to liability. And the main concern is you may be learning about protected classes that they are a member of because you are now searching their social media. If you decide to do that in the hiring process, what I suggest is that one person from the company who is not doing the interviewing and is not making the decisions be assigned to review their social media. That person can then look at the social media and decide what to disclose and not disclose to the decision makers. And then if there's an allegation down the road that you made a decision based off of what was on social media, some protected class that you were able to determine, you could respond to that and say, we had another person review the social media. They weren't a part of the decision-making process, and these are the only 3 things or whatever they disclosed to us as the decision makers. And that can kind of isolate you and insulate you from understanding and being exposed to certain things and certain protected class characteristics or certain religious beliefs or maybe disability or certain diseases they may have had in the past that would talk about a disability, or just any other protected class status they may be involved in their background and that would relate to them. If an employee social media use and postings, they also can be harassing and discriminating against other employees if they're their friends and are cyberbullying them through these aspects. And so you may have to take precautions, because in your policies you should say in your anti-discrimination policies that they cannot be harassing and engaging in those conduct against employees using these methods or when they're in the workplace. Now, selectively monitoring social media of certain employees may also give rise to retaliation claims. If someone complains in the workplace and then you only monitor their social media activities, that could be retaliatory because you're doing it for one person and not another, and you're doing it because they engage in some kind of protected conduct. We also need to be worried about if they're on social media talking about the company. They're not allowed to be disclosing the company's confidential and information on social media. And if they do that, you could terminate them for that. Absolutely. But if they're complaining about their manager and says that my manager is discriminating against me, or so-and-so is a bad manager because they won't give us water breaks and it's too hot in the facility, or something like that, that would be engaging in what's considered protected activity through the National Labor Relations Act. And if you terminated them for that, you could be liable for an improper termination, because those are proper complaints, and they can make those complaints even on social media if it's related to them advocating for better work conditions or things like that. So some people come in and say they're saying bad things about us, or they say all the managers are bad and harassing them. If they're making those kind of statements, those could be protected statements under the National Labor Relations Act. If they're making statements that are violate your discrimination and harassment policies on the social media about individuals, you could terminate them for those, or if they're, again, disclosing your confidential information. Each state has additional protections for social media use. Texas does not, but a lot of states do. So you need to pay attention to that as well before you start making decisions and try to terminate someone based on social media use, because it's a more complicated issue than one would normally anticipate, and can be an exception to at-will employment. Now we're going to move on and talk about OSHA. OSHA is the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and OSHA is a governmental agency that's in charge of safety and ensuring safety for employees in the workplace. And basically, there's tons of rules and regulations under OSHA, and we're not going to get into all those here in this conversation, and there's not a whole lot of them in the text. But they'll have rules on how an employer has to have certain guards on saws, or who can operate certain equipment and machinery, and the protections that need to be there, and what personal protective equipment needs to be worn, whether you have to wear a hard hat or ear protection for loud noises, or safety goggles, or steel-toed boots, or someone's a butcher and doing knives, they have to have certain kind of gloves so they don't cut their fingers, and a certain kind of vest that's, can't be cut through. And so they come up with all these types of rules. They also have rules on ventilation in certain warehouses, and make sure it's properly ventilated so people can breathe. Sometimes they have regulations on face masks and respirators, and that are required in certain work environments. So that's if you'll see people in buildings, a lot of times when they're working up high above 10 feet, they have to have fall harnesses being used, and all that is because of the protections provided by OSHA. OSHA has inspectors that go out and will inspect your workplace, and when they come in and knock on the door, the OSHA inspector is not allowed just to enter the workplace without your permission. If they ask for permission, you can provide it. If you don't want to provide it, you can ask them to go get a warrant. I would recommend that that's not the greatest way to start the relationship, but sometimes you may, based on the circumstances, require a warrant. But typically people do grant permission, or at least will grant permission very soon, within an hour or two, once maybe the health HSE, health, safety and environmental person, comes back, who works for the company in that position, if they were gone or something like that and couldn't meet them immediately. When they demand the inspection and want to come in, you need to ask for credentials to make sure that they really are who they say they are. And then you should not let them walk around the facility on their own, but you should follow them around. When they take a picture, you should document what they're taking a picture of and take your own picture and be there and witness what they're doing. And that's a good practice so you'll know what the inspector viewed and what pictures they took, so that you can have evidence of that as well. There are certain requirements under OSHA. But before I get to that, I want to also talk about the OSHA has a general duty clause. So even when there's not a specific violation or regulation for a certain type of activity, they have a general duty clause that all employers have to exercise general duty to keep workers safe. And a new thing that's come about recently is like an exit plan for when an emergency happens in the workplace, or some kind of, if a active shooter is there, do you have an emergency plan on how to deal with those? And so that would fall kind of under the general duty clause, or it has historically, and now they're catching up with additional regulations on that. But the general duty clause applies to all employers and says you have a general duty to keep employees safe at the workplace. If you have, there's certain times when you have to affirmatively report to OSHA. And you have to, if there's a fatality at your workplace, you have to report that fatality to OSHA within 8 hours of it happening. And if you don't do so, you will violate at OSHA, and you are going to have a bigger problem dealing with that fatality for sure. So you need to report the fatalities within 8 hours, and hopefully even sooner. You also have to report to OSHA inpatient hospitalizations of one or more employees for a work-related incident if they have an overnight stay in the hospital. And that's related to overnight stays in the hospital. And then you have to report those within 24 hours of that. So if you have one patient or more employees that have an overnight stay in the hospital, then you have to report that within 24 hours. There's also some OSHA logs that a company will have to keep for just any injuries. They'll have to log those, and those logs have to be turned over to OSHA on a yearly basis and made available for them. So I told you this would be a shorter presentation than the other ones. This wraps up the presentation for week 7. And make sure you read the other materials in the book and the other assignments, because you'll also be responsible for those. Thanks, and I hope you have a good rest of your week 7.